Table manners. Simplified speech 166. So Suzanne, today our topic is table manners. Why don't we start our conversation off by talking about some of the common table manners that we follow in North America? Of course, you and I, we are both North Americans, right? I'm Canadian, you're American, and I think our table manners are pretty much exactly the same in the two countries. I mean, at least when I visited America, I've never noticed anything that's really different in regard to table manners. I've never noticed that I've never noticed anything that's really different in regard to table manners. At least when I visited America, I've when I at least when I visited America, when at least when I visited America, I've never noticed anything that's really different in regard to table manners. But Suzanne, you've lived in both countries, so maybe you have. But Suzanne, you've lived in both countries, so maybe you have. Would you say they are pretty much exactly the same in that regard? In that regard? Would you say they are pretty much exactly the same in that regard? Yeah, I really do think so. I think everyone washes their hands for sandwiches and things we use our hands. But for the most part, we use forks and knives and things like that, napkins. So it's really generally the same, I would say. Yeah, I agree. I haven't noticed any differences in regard to table manners between Canada and the USA, but that's not to say that there aren't some differences from other countries, right? But that's not to say that there aren't any differences from other countries, right? There aren't some differences from other countries, right? I know in Europe and in Asia and Africa and India, all of these places have different etiquette and different rules around eating and what is polite and what is considered rude. Etiquette. So maybe we will start to just because we do have a global audience, we have listeners from all over the place. So maybe we should talk a little bit about what is polite in our culture. Suzanne, so what kind of table manners come to mind when you think of this topic? What kind of table manners come to mind when you think of this topic? What kind of table manners come to mind? What kind of table manners come to mind? What kind of table manners come to mind when you think of this topic? What pops into your head? Well, definitely making sure that you wash your hands before you eat or that you before you come to a table. Maybe you're meeting a friend for dinner at a restaurant. I tend to excuse myself and say, you know what, I'm just gonna wash my hands real quick. I'm just gonna wash my hands real quick. I'm just gonna wash my hands real quick. And make sure that I don't bring maybe the metro or whatever else I touched onto the table. I think that also going through the pandemic really helped to empathize having clean hands. I think that also going through the pandemic really helped to empathize having clean hands. I think that also going through the pandemic really helped to empathize having clean hands. So that's definitely something that we do here. And some people do put like the napkin or paper towel or whatever they give you on their laps a lot of times. Not everybody, but it's pretty common that people put things on their lap to protect their clothes and just to kind of make sure that you don't drop any spaghetti sauce or anything like that on your lap. Yeah, it actually, someone like me who is kind of a messy eater, that is a must. Yeah, especially someone like me, 나 같은 사람, 나같이 뭐뭐하는 사람. Yeah, especially someone like me who is who is kind of, who is kind of a messy eater. Who is kind of a messy eater, that is a must. Yeah, especially someone like me who is kind of a messy eater, that is a must. I need to do that for sure. 꼭 해야 돼. I need to do that for sure. But I have to say that when it comes to putting a napkin or something on my lap, I usually only would do that at a restaurant. But I have to say that when it comes to putting a napkin or something on my lap, I usually only would do that at a restaurant. I usually only would do that at a restaurant. I don't usually do that at home. Do you ever do that at home? I don't usually do that at home. I don't usually do that at home. Do you ever do that at home? No, I don't. And I see people wear aprons like while they're cooking. I say that because I'm a messy cooker. I say that because I'm a messy cooker. I say that because I'm a messy cooker. I definitely splatter things and spill while I'm cooking because I just really love cooking and get in the zone, and I get in the zone. I just really love cooking and I get in the zone, and I don't really think about all of the mess. I don't really think about all of the mess that is happening. And I see people wearing aprons. I see people wearing aprons at home, and I don't do that. And I have them, and I should use them. And I think I would be a lot happier because I would splatter my clothes as much. I wouldn't splatter my clothes as much. But I don't use napkins on my lap at home. Okay, and it's funny that you were talking about being a messy cooker. It's funny that 신기하다. 그런 얘기를 꺼내다니 나. It's funny that you were talking about being a messy cooker. I just actually had to throw out a couple of t-shirts because they got stained when I was cooking at home. Because they got I just actually had to. Actually had to throw out a couple of t-shirts because they got stained. they got stained when I was cooking at home, and I was saying to my wife, I need to buy an apron because I guess I am also a messy cooker, and I could protect and save my clothes. So it's just kind of funny that you brought that up. It's just kind of funny that you brought that up because I was just thinking about that. I was just thinking about that the other day as well. Suzanne, one thing also that you said that kind of sparked a thought in my head was about washing your hands before coming to the table. Many listeners will know that I live in South Korea, and one thing that they do here in South Korea, which I really love, is they always give you a wet tissue when you come. They call it water tissue in Korean language. I don't know exactly what we would call it in English. Maybe a wet wipe. Wet wipe. They give you like a wet wipe when you come to the table to wash your hands at the table. I haven't really noticed too many restaurants in Canada that do that. But I think it's a great idea, and it just is a nice way to make sure that you are speak and span before you enjoy your meal. It's a nice way to make sure that you are speak and span before you enjoy. That's wonderful. I remember my grandmother actually keeping some of those in her purse and handing them to us as kids. Because kids have dirty hands most of the time. So yeah, that seems like a really good idea to kind of keep it in your bag or your backpack. That seems like a really good idea too. That seems like a really good idea to have to keep it in your bag or your backpack. That seems like a really good idea to keep it in your bag or your backpack. That seems like that seems like a really good idea to keep it in your bag or your backpack, just in case. 혹시 모르니까, just in case. Especially if you're traveling or on a backpacking trip, somewhere that could be a really good thing to take with you. When I think about table manners, the first thing that pops into my head is when I think about table manners, the first thing that pops into my head is the first thing that pops into my head is about how you actually deal with the food. How you actually deal with your food when you are putting it into your mouth. How you actually deal with the food when you are putting it into your mouth. So like when you are chewing, and how you essentially behave when you've got food in your mouth, right? Like that's part of the eating process. So being no-nos, in my opinion, for like being polite at the dinner table, is never to chew with your mouth open, right? You want to keep your mouth closed so that you are not showing people what's inside your mouth. And also, you don't want to be loud, right? The sounds that comes out of people's mouth when they chew with their mouth open, it's really just gross, right? The sound that comes out of people's mouth when they chew with their mouth open, it's really gross, right? That sound that comes out of people's mouth when they chew with their mouth open, it's really gross, right? It's really just gross, right? It's gross. And also, one thing that can help with that is to not talk while your mouth is full, right? So if you take a bite, and then someone asks you a question, and it can be challenging. Maybe you say like, just 1 second, and you're finished chewing, and then you can answer their question, because especially if you're out to dinner at a restaurant, you are there probably to have conversation. So you have to kind of time your conversation around your bites of food so that you don't spit any food out onto the table. Yeah, and another thing, Suzanne, is slurping when you're eating your food, right? Like if you're eating pasta or noodles or soup or something. In general, we want to try and keep the noises down. That's considered to be polite. That's considered to be polite table manners in Canada. Yeah, and I want to ask you, Andrew, do you ever lift up your bowl to finish the end of your soup, or drink at the end of your soup? Is that something that you do? Yes, but okay, this actually comes into the different table manners when you're in public and table manners when you're at home. Because I think at home, I definitely do that. And I've lived in Korea for so long that I sometimes just go by the Korean way of doing things. I sometimes just go by the Korean way of doing things, and that's not like super rude to do that in Korea. Like I see people do that. And I was at a restaurant yesterday meeting my friend for lunch, and we had a little bowl of soup that was on the side with our main meal. And they didn't even give us a spoon, or they weren't spoon on the table. You were just expect to drink that little cup of soup right from the little bowl that it came with. So I do it at home, and I do it sometimes in Korea. But it's really like restaurant specific. And I think if I were in Canada, maybe I wouldn't do that. If I were at a nicer restaurant, I would think that's a little bit too much. I would think that's a little bit too much. Yeah, I hear you. I guess it depends on restaurant. I asked because it's not something I ever did at home or in public. But Olivier, my partner, he does it. And they do that in France. And sometimes he does that in a restaurant as well. And I just always watch him like, I never do that. But I think it's fine. It's great. It's kind of means like I love it so much. I want to get every last drop, and it was just a question. It was just a question because it was something thing I noticed that I was not used to, but that seems totally acceptable. And it was just a question because it was something I noticed that I was not used to, but that seems totally acceptable. I like what you just said there, and that is that when you drink your soup, and especially I think we do this at the end, right? When it gets hard to scoop up the soup with your spoon, usually that's when you start drinking it. It's not often that you get like a big hot steaming bowl of soup and just drink it right away. But when you're towards the end and it's more convenient to drink it, it does show that you enjoy it, right? You're like really enjoying your meal, and that's something that I've noticed in Korea. There are some slight differences about they are some slight differences. 약간 다른 게 있어. They are There are some slight differences about what's polite at the table and what's rude at the table. And I think in both cultures, generally, you don't want to make too much noise or be disgusting with your eating, but you don't want to make too much noise or be disgusting with your eating. But I have noticed here in Korea that if people are eating a little bit louder or like slurping their noodles or maybe drinking their soup or something like that, it's kind of showing that you really are enjoying your meal. And people will comment like, wow, this guy is like really enjoying his food, like it must be so delicious. So yeah, it's just kind just it's just like a different viewpoint, but it's interesting. And that's fascinating to hear that they do that in France as well. Yeah, I think similar to my family, my Italian family, if you're eating it kind of fast, then it means that you're really enjoying it, right? Like it's so good. You want to really just devour it. Whereas when I go to France, for example, they eat very slow. They take a bite, put down their fork and knife, chew it, maybe look at you, just listen to a story, take another bite, put down. Yeah, it's very slow. And that was something that I was surprised at when I first went to France and ate out a dinner or even at my mother in law's house. I was very surprised at how slow people ate and they don't have large portions. So they are really savoring each bite in a smaller amount and in a slower pace. That's probably a much better way to eat in terms of like digesting your food properly and not overeating. I could also see that being a little bit uncomfortable, like if you're meeting your partner's parents for the first time or something like that, and you have to eat really slowly, like these tiny little bites and get the food down slowly, depending on the social arrangement of the dinner party. It could be maybe more awkward, but I think, yeah, I'm not a doctor, but I would think that's a healthier way to eat than, sometimes the way that we do in North America, where we just eat a lot and we eat quickly. It's true, and I noticed also something different about French culture when we are out to dinner because my family is American and Olivier's family is French, and we've had some instances over the past years where we've been together at dinner, and I noticed that they wait until everyone gets their food at a restaurant to begin eating. And this is not something that is in all of North America as far as a culture happening. Like most of us don't wait until everyone is served because the food is hot, and so we kind of go for it and just start eating. But with the French people, they tend to wait till everyone is served, even if they are waiting like 5, 6, 10 minutes. So it can be a little shocking if you're like, oh shoot, I shouldn't have take that bite. Sorry about that, everybody. If your food comes out first, then you might be put in a difficult situation. Totally, totally. Now you can pick on your French fries. That's okay. Okay, it's just like can't dive into the main course. Totally, that's it. That's what I noticed. So that's interesting because personally, maybe this was just like my family, but we always follow that kind of same system where we'd wait for everybody's food to be served, and it was always considered to be a little bit rude to jump in and start eating. You know, usually in that situation, the other people will feel kind of burdened that they are making you wait. So they will say, oh, just go ahead, like tuck in. You don't have to wait for me. But without that permission of the other person, then it always felt a little bit rude. So I've always followed that as well. But that's caused some problems for me now that I'm living in Korea. Because usually in Korea, it's like the head of the family or maybe the head of a company, whoever is like the top dog in the line of command. Once they start eating, then you can start eating. So for example, when I meet with my wife's family, it's my father-in-law. He's kind of the head of the household. So once he starts eating, well, then we can follow after him. But often what happens when I go for dinner at my in at my in-laws place in when I go for dinner at my in-laws place is that my mother-in-law will always be just busy in the kitchen, and she won't sit down at the table. She will still be like cooking and bringing food to the table and that kind of thing. And my father-in-law will just start eating, and then I'm put in a difficult place because I think it's kind of rude to start eating when my mother-in-law is still like cooking and preparing things. So I feel like I need to wait for her. But then my father-in-law will tell me, start eating, come on, let's go. So I'm kind of stuck in the middle of like my culture and Korean culture and I don't know what is best to do. But obviously since I'm in Korea, I try to follow the Korean rules even though that gives me a slightly uncomfortable feeling. Yeah, I just thought of an idea. You could jump up and say, here, let me help you, and then maybe you can help her get to the table faster. So then Believe me, I've tried and that doesn't fly either. I just get shooed away very quickly, but I like your thinking. I like that idea. Yes, Suzanne, how do you feel about technology at the table? Oh wow, that's a good question. It's interesting because I think with the pandemic, a lot of restaurants had menus that are QR codes, so you needed your phone out. And some still do that. Where we went to a restaurant last week where we needed to have our phones out in order to look at the menu. Order in order to look at the menu, and I don't love it. I kind of like keeping my phone away while I'm eating, just to have a break from the notifications and the distractions. How about you, Andrew? What do you think?